Hello artists, are you ready to make some texture monsters? Last week we did crayon rubbings and we went on a texture hunt where you looked for textures. So we are going to make some monsters today that have some texture in their faces. They look kind of bumpy or hairy or rough textures, instead of just having a smooth texture when we paint them with watercolors. Now, this project idea is not original. It came from a site called artprojectsforkids.org, but I kind of springboarded from it. They call them simple monsters. I'm calling them texture monsters and doing a couple other different textures. So the materials that you will need for this project are watercolors, a black crayon. You may want a couple other crayons. I have some isopropyl alcohol here, some salt, some saran wrap that I've kind of got cut into 2 pieces. And then whenever I'm doing watercolor, I always just want some paper towels handy. And then of course water and your paintbrush. Parents, I like a little wider tip than what comes with your typical Crayola set. It just, kids don't have to paint as long. It covers more area and keeps attention span a little bit longer. So I like a little bit wider tip, and you could even get a wider tip than that. Now for paper, best paper would be watercolor paper, but since you probably don't have that at home, some of you may, but if you do, great, use some watercolor paper. I'm using cardstock. You do not want to use just a simple computer paper, because what that does is it absorbs the watercolors too quickly, and we need something where the watercolors will stay on the surface just a little bit for this project. So the first thing, we're not even going to use a pencil. The first thing I'd like you to do is to get that black crayon and follow along for a directed drawing. So what we're going to start with, let me put this guy like right here so you can see him. What we're going to start with when we do our drawings is just a line going from one edge of my paper all the way to the other edge. And that line can be like a hill, it can go downhill, it can go kind of uphill, it can go straight across. So you're just going to, down in like the bottom half of your paper, you're going to draw a line that goes from one side to the other. So I'm going to make my line go kind of up like that. Okay, now I am going to draw 2 circles for eyes. I have a lid here from a kombucha, and I could, if I want, trace a lid, but I don't need to trace, because monsters, if you notice, my eyes aren't even all the same size. I don't have to draw perfect circles for monster eyes, because not perfect circles makes it look even a little bit more like a monster. So see, I've got one bigger and one smaller. Here's what I do say though, that you don't want tiny little eyes on your monster. You want some pretty good sized eyes so that you have room for the pupils inside your eyes. So go ahead and watch me first, and then you're gonna draw one eye and give it some space and draw another eye. All right. So go ahead and do that. Then once you have that, by the way, just stop this tape anytime as I'm going along and then continue it. Now you get to put some expression. Where do I want my eyes looking? I could put my pupils at the top if I want him looking up. I can put them at the bottom if I want him looking down. If I want him looking right at me, right in the middle, to the side, I can put them to the right side, or I could put them to the left side if I want him looking the other way. I can make him looking up and over, or kind of crazy right in the middle. I can make some crazy eyes looking out. So let's kind of look at my monsters. I wanted this guy to be kind of looking at his horn. So he's kind of looking in the middle, looking at his horn. I wanted this guy to be looking straight at you. This one's looking off to the side. And let's see where my last one, how he was kind of looking at the middle too. So you decide, where do you want yours looking? So I think I am going to have, I didn't have any monsters looking down. So I think I'm going to make this guy looking down. And I like to say, okay, I want mine to be, my eyeballs to be about the size of like a penny. You might not have room to make them about the size of a penny. So I just kind of go around and around and around in circles and work my way around and do those monster eyes. Now, I need to put in the top of his head. So the top of his head, I can kind of go up if I want to and back down, make a mountain. I could just come down. So decide, this guy, his kind of goes up, okay? This one's more like a mountain, okay? Decide how you want your eyes. This guy kind of goes down. How do you want to connect this top of your head to your eyes? So when you do it, put your first line in and then say, well, where would this line come out? Maybe I can make it come up, or if I want to. So maybe if I pretend I'm going through his eyes, it might come out right here. And I'm going to kind of make mine go down. So now I've got the top of his head. Now I'm going to decide, what do I want to put on his head? What do I want to put? Now this one, I put some little antennas with circles on the end. When I experimented, I put antennas with little diamond shapes or triangles at the end. This one, I put kind of some hairs that are kind of angled. This one, I did some hairs that are thick. And on this one, he has like a unicorn horn or a party hat. So on this one, I didn't have any wavy hairs. So I think for this one, I am just going to add some wavy hairs. And again, you can stop the video, draw in your hairs, and go back. And I kind of fill the space a little bit that's up here with those hairs. So now I have my hair. I only have one thing left to do, and that is teeth. This guy has kind of triangle teeth where I could just draw some like upside down V's, just draw my angles. This one has dome teeth. And notice again, they're not perfect. They kind of go all different directions because he's a monster. He doesn't have a dentist. And this one kind of has rectangles, so I could do rectangles or squares or triangles, and I can add my teeth. So I think for this guy, I am going to go ahead and do kind of some rectangles. And again, I'm going to make them go all different directions. That makes them look more like a monster. I'm going to make different heights, and I am going to kind of go off the page, okay? So that my monster, his head is not completely on the page. So I'm going to go off the page. Now I'm going to paint. And here's what I am going to recommend. I'm going to recommend that when you paint the sky behind him first. And then if you want to paint the eyeballs, like this guy, I painted the eyeballs, you can paint the eyeballs. But I'm going to recommend you paint him last because we want this paint to stay wet because we're going to add some texture to it. Now, I have already wet my paints. They've been wet since about 5 minutes before I started this video, so that I like them nice and goopy and I get darker colors that way. So I'm going to just paint my background really fast here. I'm going to go ahead and paint my background. And so my background will be all done. Now I'm not going to paint the eyes on this one. I could paint the eyes, but I'm not going to paint the eyes on this one because I don't want to take your time with painting the eyes. I want to get to some of those textures and explain how we do some of those textures. And then you can go ahead and experiment with textures and try several textures on your own. I would even recommend making several monsters. Parents, what I did for the size of this paper is I used the cardstock. I cut it in half lengthwise, so I cut it about 5.5 because it's 8.5 by 11, but I cut off an additional 1/2 at the end. So you could do that first, cut off the 8.5 to make it 8 because otherwise it was a little bit longer proportionally than I wanted it. So I cut that cardstock in half. So now I've got kind of my sky, and I can kind of make that textured if I want to by kind of just rubbing my brush and make it a little bit textured if I want to, or I can just kind of leave it and make it nice and nice straight brush strokes, however you would like to do that top. But now is a really fun part, and that's where we get to play. So this guy has a hairy texture, and if I wanted to make a hairy texture, I would need, before I watercolored, to go ahead and add some hairs. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some hairs for that hairy texture. Now I want that hairy texture, I want it to be kind of thick because that crayon is what it resists the paint. So I'm going to do it, and we don't want it just perfectly spaced little, no, hair wouldn't be perfectly spaced, have some close together, some far apart, and add some kind of hairy texture to the monster. Now I'm going to recommend something else, and that is not to really use yellow on the base unless you're doing like a resist, because for the other techniques that we're using, the yellow will not show up well. This would be okay to use your yellow with, because the yellow would actually show up a little bit, help the magenta I'm using look really nice. On this one, I used the yellow crayon to resist, and then I painted purple over the top of it. It didn't show up as much as I liked, so I went back after I was done and added the crayon black hairs. So then this, when I paint this section, will resist. So I think I am going to make my monster, again, you probably don't want it to be yellow, but I think I'm going to go ahead and make this monster orange. On this one you could make yellow, but in general you probably wouldn't want to make it yellow. And I'm going to just do some orange up here and add some water, and then you can kind of get that hairy texture. This is the only one that you're going to do first. In other words, every other one you're going to put your watercolor on and then add the other thing to it, like the alcohol I'll show you in a minute, or the salt. So normally what I might do is, like I did this whole guy. I did hairy, but you could do like I do half hairy and half something else, but normally I would just do one texture per monster. And parents, like I said, if they do more than one, I think it's really cute to be framed in that set of 3 like I had at the very beginning of this video. You could do a set of 3 and frame them, or if you have more than one child, have each child do one, or have one child do 2, another one do 1, and something like that. So that is the hairy texture. So now I'm going to go ahead and paint the bottom orange too. And I want this, like I said, you can't use just regular computer paper because the paints have to sit up on top, and so I want this to stay wet. And so I'm going to add my nice orange on here, and then I am going to show you the saran wrap technique with my saran wrap. And you can combine some of these techniques. I think I'll combine that technique on this one. He's only going to have hair on his top half of his head, not on his chin. But I need some more goop for that one. I want a little bit darker and goopier in some of these places. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my saran wrap with this, and I am just going to kind of scrunch. I have one piece that's a little bit bigger. I want the little bit bigger piece. I'm just going to kind of lay it and scrunch it on here. And you can see as I scrunch it on here that the paint starts to gather in some areas and form darker areas and lighter areas. So I might even go ahead and say, okay, I've already got hair up here, but there's nothing wrong with doing some Saran wrap up here too. And just so that I will go ahead and leave this then and let it totally dry before I come back to it. So let it totally dry overnight, and then come back and pull those off. And when you pull off the saran wrap, you should get something along these lines where we get that kind of blotchy, rough texture. All right, so for the last two that I'm going to show you, I am just simply going to paint on a piece of paper. I'm not going to take your time to draw another monster, but I'm simply going to paint on a piece of paper. So I'm going to paint, I love the blue, so I'm going to paint some blue up here, nice, and see how dark that is? Okay, nice and dark. And then what I did for this guy to get the blotches was I took my kombucha cap again, and I put some alcohol in it. If I tried to drip it out of here, it just came out too much, too fast. And then I dipped my end of my paintbrush, the other end, the blunt end, into the alcohol that's in the cap. And then I can create these nice round areas where the alcohol kind of lightens and separates the paint. And so you can just give him a bad case of polka dots. So that is another way that you could get some texture with your painting. You could go ahead and splatter it if you wanted to, but that's one way you can get some texture, is by adding little dots. Now, I told you that I got this idea from Art Projects for Kids. What they had done is they just squeezed some lemon juice. So lemon juice will also create this kind of effect. I like alcohol better because like I could control it a little bit more than the squeezing of the lemon juice, and you can get big blotchy areas if it squeezes a lot in one area, where I can kind of control this. And that's what we did for this monster. And then my favorite one I saved for last. And my favorite one is to use, and I think I haven't used red yet. We'll go ahead and use some nice goopy red. I just really love adding salt and sprinkling salt. And again, to help me control the salt, what I do is I take the salt and I put it in my hand. And then I just pinch it and drop it. And again, you want this to be wet. It does not work as well if it is dry. And then you have to leave it and come back, and you can sprinkle off the salt. Might have it just a little too thick in an area like that as far as the paint goes. But what you get is you get these areas created by the salt, spreading the paint basically away from right where the salt is, and then it kind of gathers at the edges of the salt, and you get these nice areas. So I hope you had fun creating a texture monster. I'm loving the pictures that you guys are sending me. Quite a few of you sent me your texture rubbings last week. These are optional projects, but fun. So if you would like to send me those portfolios, I would love to see them. So have a great week.